I don't think I need to tell you that it's been a week of drama after drama in the governing party, the ANC, from the suspension of the Secretary-General Ace Magashule to leaked recordings of the ongoing NEC meeting. Of course, leaving out there also the counter-suspension, right, by the Secretary-General who is suspended, the purported suspension of the ANC president as well. One wonders what's really going on and where all of this leads us to. Let's speak to the South African Communist Party's first Deputy General Secretary, that's Solly Mapaila. Mr. Mapaila, I was likening your situation as the SACP, as the tripartite alliance, as a tripartite alliance member, to that of, a family watching this one family member that's so central to unity of the family and cohesion of the family unit. But this family member is engaging in serious self-harm and on a path of destruction. Right now, as the SACP, as you're watching this situation, how concerned are you about the crisis that's not new, by the way, in the ANC, but where it is at the moment?
Yeah, firstly, I agree with you, Tulasizo. I think the first thing is that we wished the ANC strength during this most difficult time that it faces, and that we are quite confident it will recover. It has faced many previous difficult situations than this. But I think, if you like, using our political theory, we can say the ANC is facing a nice contradiction, in a sense that in order for the ANC to deepen its renewal system, it has to face this kind of a contradiction. And out of this, the NEC, we believe, it will depart into a new path of reorganization and rebuilding and renewal. And therefore, that's why we characterize this, it's not an harmonious contradiction, but it's a nice one in the sense that it's necessary for the organization to go through this kind of a contradiction. Nonetheless, the manner in which it is happening defies the logic of our organizational theory and protocols, where, for instance, we have seen new tendencies where members want to own the organization. And they think they are entitled to positions in the organization, whereas the organizational theory states that actually the organization owns the position, which it elects individuals into. And therefore, the organization can decide at will, within its own processes, the removal of a particular individual in its own positions. The individuals don't own the positions. So, and I think the ANC has embarked on an extremely transparent internal process, sometimes tedious and taking long, frustrating those of us who felt that they could have taken this decision long time ago. But we're quite happy that they're discussing this matter right now.
Let's speak in specifics, Mr. Mapaila. Which members are these that are behaving as if they own the organization and behaving as if they own positions that are actually owned by the organization?
No, Tilasizo, you like unnecessary tensions. The issue is that we are debating what the ANC is handling this weekend, which is a dominant issue about the Secretary-General and the step-aside rule. And we also want to reassert this thing that sometimes it's also important that when we deal with these matters, journalists as well as the commentariat read ANC documents. If you read the ANC Constitution, for instance, Article 25.70,
yeah,
it talks to the suspension of a member.
Temporary suspension.
It's quite clear about that particular procedure,
yes,
let alone the debate about how to set up a framework for the National Conference resolution in this regard. But the Constitution of the ANC is clear on this matter. Though there should be no real debate about this. The issue is the functionality that actually the NEC should seek to resolve as well.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that provision is there in the ANC Constitution, and it does talk to the issue of a temporary suspension of a member if it's decided by the Secretary-General that it's in the best interest of the organization while that particular member faces charges, for example. And it's a separate process, by the way, to the processes around, someone who's come through the national disciplinary processes or the provincial disciplinary processes and the appeal mechanisms attendant thereto, which is why you're talking about this particular process needing to have an appeal process of its own. Are you suggesting that actually when you're talking about a nice contradiction and deepening the renewal of the ANC. In your view, will this be the National Executive Committee meeting that slingshots the ANC into this much talked about, long awaited, much dreamt about path of renewal? What makes you so confident that this is the slingshot moment?
Because at the moment, the ANC cannot backtrack from the way forward. The way forward, which is expected by all South Africans, it's such that the ANC has to renew itself. It's that particular critical moment. But I think, having said that, it's also important to appreciate that the ANC NEC has to recognize that it doesn't act only for itself, but it acts for society as a whole. All eyes are on how the ANC unites our country, unite itself, unite the alliance, and therefore unite us to confront the challenges that we face because of its strategic historical leadership role that it has provided in our society and in the national liberation struggle. So therefore, it can't fail in this critical moment, and we're quite confident that it will not fail.
So listening to one of the recordings that have leaked from the National Executive Committee meeting, and I'll give you a moment to talk about the leaks, of course, because the ANC is concerned, but for a moment, sticking to the content thereof, the former president of the ANC, Thabo Mbeki, there citing another NEC member and saying that, you know, we need to reflect on this question that's been asked of whether or not there's still an organization called the African National Congress. Taking what you just said about, you know, where the organization in terms of leadership stands, but also the need to act and take all of society with it, but then also reflecting on issues such as structures and branches. What would be your answer as a tripartite alliance member to the question that says, is there still an organization in the true sense of a coherent and cohesive organization that is called the ANC?
Most certainly there is an organization. I think that perhaps I didn't hear what the leaks, and I don't want to comment much on the leaks. I'll rather comment on the official positions of the ANC, because as you know, the leaks sometimes are released by different factions, and we are in alliance with the ANC, not with various factions that do not actually expose or leak the whole truth about what's happening inside the NEC. But nonetheless, if we were to respond to your question, one will say that there is an organization, but the point that is being raised is whether the value system of that organization is being adhered to. And that's the fundamental question about us as the movement, because every other time, everywhere where an ANC person is, that person has an embodiment of the totality of our value system. That is what we talk about the organization. You can have an organization with 1 million members, but devouring itself, not able to fulfill its strategic mission. Then you may theoretically question its existence in terms of its original mission. But in this regard, I could say the ANC remains and still there and has provided one of the most strategic leadership in our country's moment during this COVID-19 pandemic. And I think it's unfortunate that these factions have deviated from the critical leadership role that the ANC has provided in this current conjuncture to internal squabbles within the organization.
Yeah, in fact, you take me to my last point, Mr. Mapaila, because I do want to make that central to all conversations we have about the ANC, the so what of it all. Let me suggest to you that not as much political and intellectual fuel will be burnt at that NEC in pursuance of the other agenda items, such as the updates on the COVID-19 pandemic and vaccine rollout, as well as the issue around the parliamentary process to amend Section 25 of the Constitution. They will be there. I'm not saying they will not be covered at all, but I'm just saying that in terms of expending political energy and fuel, you probably won't be, they probably won't be as vigorous as they are on these internal factions. What's your take on that?
No, there will always be. I think it's sometimes what is juicy in the public domain, or particularly through the commentariat and the media. These questions have always been there. I mean, the ANC and its allies throughout this critical period of the pandemic engulfing our country developed economic intervention mechanism the approach towards the COVID-19 pandemic and how to sustain and prevent loss of life. Of course, to the extent that the pandemic was ravaging our country, it still devastated us. So there's always been that on the table. It has never left the table. Yet lately there's been an economic recovery and transformation program that has been adopted by government. So there are many other interventions. So the broader space of engagement, whether it's about public sector wages and others, vaccine rollout, including this question, for instance, a critical moment in the whole world where South Africa led the entire world together, working together with India, for the suspension of intellectual property on vaccine production and development has been lost, because that's a strategic role of the world. Now this matter is being embraced even by major world leaders looking at how to save lives. And South Africa has led in that regard. But this critical matter is not even accorded to its rightful place. The fact that South Africa provided leadership role in this regard for the whole world. So these are important questions that are already being attended to by South Africa economically and policy-wise across the board. So I think it's also important for the commentariat and the media to also create a balance on what are the issues that they need to report to the public, particularly the questions of economic transformation during this period.